Welcome to part 2 of the freshly milled sourdough course here on YouTube. I'm excited to get started. Today we are diving into why you would want to make a sourdough starter, how to make a sourdough starter, and how to maintain that sourdough starter so that you can start using it to bake with. So why would you want to have a sourdough starter? Well, first, a sourdough starter is natural yeast. Store-bought yeast is isolated yeasts from a sourdough starter that are freeze-dried or dehydrated, and then you reconstitute them in warm water, and then they will rise the bread. But there's one thing missing from the store-bought yeast, and that is the lactic acid bacteria. That's the good bacteria you hear everybody talk about that's in sourdough. That's good for the gut. That breaks down phytic acid and makes your bread more digestible and better for you all the way around. So sourdough, being that it's just a natural yeast, it acts quite differently from store-bought yeast. It actually takes quite a bit longer to rise bread because it's a natural, long fermented process. I'm sure you know all this, but I just wanted to make it clear why you would want to use a sourdough starter instead of commercial yeast. I use commercial yeast in my kitchen from time to time, but almost always I make all of my bread products with sourdough starter long fermented. Okay, so let's talk about what you will need to make a sourdough starter. It's pretty simple. You just need a container, flour, and filtered water. Now, being that this is a fresh milled sourdough course, I am highly recommending that you make your sourdough starter with freshly milled flour. You can use any freshly milled flour that you like. I personally like to use either hard white wheat or hard red wheat. That's just, I have more of that on hand than I do of other wheat varieties, and so I tend to use it more often. A couple of things to keep in mind when you make a sourdough starter from scratch. It takes several days for a sourdough starter to become active. You will notice sometimes on day 3 that there's all this activity and you get so excited, but then the activity dies off by day 4 and you think you killed it. You didn't. It's fine. That is completely normal, and it's just the process of leveling off the bacteria and the yeast so that they take over anything bad that's in there. So that's fine. Now, the days that it takes for your starter to become active will vary from the days it takes for my starter to become active, and that's okay. Just trust the process, keep going, and you will get there. All right, so we're going to talk about making a sourdough starter. We're going to go through from day 1 all the way through. I'm inserting this video that I made a while back on how to make a sourdough starter, no discard, with freshly milled flour. I used spelt in this particular starter, but you can use any freshly milled flour that you want. And this method is awesome because there's no taking out on certain days, and then you just feed it every day until it's active. And that makes for a much more streamlined approach to making a sourdough starter for beginners. Now, once you have been doing sourdough for years like me, and you want to make sourdough starters, you may do it just your own way, and that's fine. But I highly suggest following a method. I'm going to include in the description box below a free sourdough ebook, and it tells you how to make a sourdough starter where you're going to discard some of it. But if you prefer not to discard any, then follow this video that I'm going to be inserting showing you how to make a sourdough starter from scratch with no discarding and using freshly milled flour. So the first day I added 2 tablespoons of freshly milled spelt flour and 2 tablespoons of water. I mixed it very well, and then I put one of these fermenting caps on top because it's just easier than trying to keep some other kind of lid on, but you can just put like a coffee filter or something on. And I just put it beside the wood stove, and then I checked on it in 24 hours. So on the second day, I had to add at least what I had put in there before. So there was 2 tablespoons of flour the first day. I'm adding 2 tablespoons of flour today and 2 tablespoons of water. I'm going to mix it well, do the same thing, put the lid on, put it by the wood stove, and then I'll check on it in the morning. So this is day 2. All right, guys, it's early. It's still dark outside. Still have crazy hair, but I'm getting ready to feed this starter. It's day 3. Yesterday evening, it was really bubbly and active already, so I'm pretty excited about this. But I wanted to tell you real quick before I feed this. This starter now has, in total, 4 tablespoons of flour. So I need to feed it at least that amount to keep the activity going. If I only feed it the 2 tablespoons again, it's not enough food for this to really feed on and build up that good bacteria. So today I will actually be feeding it 4 tablespoons of flour and 4 tablespoons of water. Now I also want to make a note that I'm using flour from the freezer to make this, and it's still activating and doing fine. I had a little extra spelt flour last week. It's less than a week ago that I put in the freezer, and I'm using that up for the starter. So I'm going to feed this 4 tablespoons of flour, 4 tablespoons of water. This starter is going to be ready by the weekend. Today is Tuesday. I'm going to use the starter for pancakes so that I can build it up and hopefully start making spelt sourdough bread by next week, which is pretty exciting. I forgot to hit record. I'm sorry, but I did add 4 tablespoons of flour, 4 tablespoons of water, and just put it back by the wood stove. This is day 3. Got a lot of hooch, so it's very hungry. Now, today is going to be different because this now has a total of 8 tablespoons of flour. So I'm going to add 8 tablespoons of flour to it. But I'm going to decrease the water just a bit to 6 tablespoons to make it a little bit thicker. Now, if this gets as active today as it did yesterday, I may just go ahead and feed it the full amount that I want and put it in the refrigerator because it got so active yesterday. So I'm just going to stir the hooch in. You can pour it off if you want, but I usually just stir it in, and I'm going to pour this in my crock. You can see it gets thinner when it gets hungry. So that's why it looks so thin. So I'm going to do 8 tablespoons. This is a 2 tablespoon measure. This flour was actually just milled a few minutes ago. I'm going to do 8 tablespoons of flour. So there's 2, 4, 6, and 8. And instead of the 8 tablespoons of water, I'm going to do 6 and make it a little bit thicker. 2, 4, and 6. Now I'm just going to stir this in. When you're stirring your starter, I've said this before, but just make sure you stir it vigorously. That adds air, and air is an important component to starting a sourdough starter and maintaining one as well. Okay, so I'm just going to put my lid on this and leave it sit out. I'm going to check it in a few hours, and if it's as active as it was yesterday, I'll probably just go ahead and feed it a cup of flour and some water, let it get active, and put it in the fridge. And what I will do is use a cup of this for some pancakes this weekend, and then maybe make some whole grain sourdough biscuits. Just kind of build the starter up before I actually try to make a loaf of sandwich bread. So this is day 4. congratulations, you have just made a sourdough starter using fresh milled flour with no discard. How exciting! And you are ready to start on your sourdough journey. So I want you to go in the description box and read the blog post, How I Maintain My Sourdough Starter in the Fridge. The reason being is I really highly recommend that you use this method. I'll be relating back to it, referring back to it from time to time throughout this course. And I want to make sure that, if possible, we can all be on the same page when it comes to maintaining the sourdough starter. So in the weeks to come, I want you to use your sourdough starter for pancakes, muffins, crackers. I'll leave some recipes down below that you can use your sourdough starter in while you're building it up. Use my method for maintaining the sourdough starter in the fridge. And while you are waiting on your sourdough starter to get mature and build up and be ready to make bread, we're going to move on to the next module, which is all about wheat berries. Everything that we need to know about wheat berries, what grain meal to use, what settings to use on your grain meal, what wheat berries that work best for what, how to store your wheat berries if you buy them in bulk. Lots of information is going to be on the next module. So how exciting. You made a sourdough starter and you have your journey started now, and it's just going to get better from here. So let me know in the comment section below how your sourdough starter went, and if it is good and active. If you have any questions at all about the sourdough starter, this is the time to ask before we move on too far into the course, and I will guide you and help you through that. Don't forget, if you haven't already, join the Facebook group for this course, Fresh Milled Sourdough. It's in the description box down below. There's also printables down there and my free sourdough ebook. There's some things in there that you might find interesting and helpful as we journey through these modules together. So thank you so much for joining me today on getting started with sourdough, why that you want to do it, and how you can make a sourdough starter with fresh milled flour. Now, as we move on through these modules, I highly encourage you to ask questions as we go if there's anything that's not clear, because I do not want you to move on and not be completely sure about what's happening. And if I need to, I will video something and send it to your email. I just want to make sure that you are successful in your sourdough and your fresh milled flour journey. So do not hesitate to ask questions, and we will walk through this together. All right, well, we made it through module 1, making a sourdough starter, and next week we are going to jump into the fresh milled flour, and we're just going to have so much fun with that. We're going to learn so much together. So thank you for joining me today on the Fresh Milled Sourdough course, module 1, episode 2, and I can't wait to see you back here next week, same day and same time. Y'all have a good one, and we will see you really soon.